Hello, everyone. Thank you for your patience. It wouldn't be a webinar series without any technical difficulties to get started, but we're all here now. So we're just going to give folks a minute to fill in to be allowed let into the Zoom. So welcome and thank you for joining us for our October AAC Awareness Month 2024 webinar series. We're going to be celebrating AAC Awareness Month all October long. Each week, we're going to be here at noon on either a Tuesday or a Wednesday to talk about an exciting AAC related topic. And so today's presentation is going to be Unconventional AAC, supporting vocabulary access for swearing, slang, and sexuality. My name is Haley Strickler. I'm going to be the main speaker for today, but you'll also see my wonderful SLP colleagues, Jen, Cassie, and Ming. And so they'll be monitoring the chat as well as the Q&A throughout the webinar today. And then you'll also be hearing from them throughout this month. Each of us will be presenting a topic for you. So we hope to see you at the next coming weeks. So just a little bit about us. We are all speech language pathologists and AAC services coordinators for the Institute on Disabilities at Temple University. We work on the TechOWL program, which is Pennsylvania's Assistive Technology program. So that's just a little bit about us. Before we get into the content, we just want to do some quick logistics, housekeeping things for the Zoom. If you do need captioning, the live transcription option for captions is available with Zoom. If you're not seeing that on your screen or as an option to turn it on, you might need to update your Zoom to the latest version. We ask that you type any questions in the Q&A feature. And I'm changing the settings now as well in the chat. So you should be able to also use the chat feature throughout. So just a quick note about the chat. If you do have it set to your message to everyone, that means other attendees can also see your message in the chat. If you have it set to hosts and panelists, that goes to one of us or all four of us. So just keep that in mind, depending on how private you want your chat message, or if you're participating in any of the little question activities or things like that. There will also be more time at the end for questions. We're always happy to hang on and answer any questions that folks may have, but do feel free to take advantage of the Q&A feature for those questions, and feel free to use the chat as well. My colleagues will be keeping an eye on that throughout the presentation. So just like with any learning opportunity, we have a few learning objectives. So this is just kind of the bare minimum that we hope that you get out of today's session. So we want you to be able to recommend 3 or more examples of taboo words and concepts to include in AAC devices and systems for each life stage. Describe at least 2 strategies to support learning and the use of taboo words and concepts in AAC, and then develop at least 2 rationales to support access to sexual health, intimacy, and/or relationship vocabulary for AAC users. So just a few presentation disclaimers. There's actually going to be a lot of disclaimers and kind of content warnings throughout this presentation, just so that you have the most information and also a heads up for some of the next kind of sets of content. So I do want to mention that I will be speaking today from the perspective of a speech language pathologist who does specialize in AAC. And although that we will be talking about healthy sexuality and how that vocabulary is related to those topics, as well as how it's represented on AAC devices, I want to clarify that I am not a trained sex educator, sex therapist, or clinician. My work really focuses on taking the available research, recommendations, and information that's out there and from the, other providers and researchers in the fields of sexuality, sexual health, as well as the larger area of profanity and linguistics, and then trying to make it applicable and relevant to speech pathology, assistive technology, and AAC as a practice. And I also do want to mention too that I'm going to be using a variety of identity first and person first language. And I do this to be respectful and inclusive of all preferences and identities. So you're going to hear both types of language interchangeably throughout the presentation. So for example, you might hear me say person with a disability, or you might hear me say disabled person, person who uses AAC, AAC user. So those are just some examples. I do want to give a content warning. So it's in the title of the presentation. We're going to be talking about some controversial topics, and there's also going to be explicit text on the screen, and some more maybe explicit images later on in the presentation when we're looking at symbols and vocabulary sets for devices. So the text is going to feature, swear words, again, pictures of swear words, or explicit concepts, but mostly that's going to be through AAC symbol representation. So think about things like body part vocabulary, or vocabulary symbols for different sex acts. So profanity is going to be said, read, and it's going to be shown on the slides. We're also going to talk about abuse. So just please keep that in mind throughout the presentation. One of the big things that I do talk a lot about is that word choice is really a personal choice, and then so are our boundaries. That being said, I will be implementing a personal boundary and not showing the text of any identity slurs on my slides. These words might be referenced though as a concept throughout, but you're not going to hear me say them. You're not going to hear me or see them on the slides. There will be a slide later on that does feature a list of the top curse words from this one study by age. I did intentionally pull out the kind of what I think like 9 to 10-year-old one. It doesn't affect the overall data, but that their age group did feature some identity slurs. I'm implementing a boundary just by not including them. But if you are interested in seeing that, the article is referenced on that slide. So that is an example. So all that being said, if you do feel the need to log off to feel safe during this presentation, since we will be talking about some triggering topics, please feel free to do so at any time. I'm also going to give another content warning before I show any images as well. So to get started, whenever I do this presentation, I like to ask people, what's the best bad word that you know? So please put something, a best bad word in the chat, but I do ask no identity group slurs or anything related to that. Just give me the best fun bad words that you can think of. And it's okay, no one's gonna get in trouble for saying any bad words here. So feel free to put those in the chat. Don't leave me hanging. Oh, we got bitch. Oh, a good CUNT fuck. Oh, we're getting a lot of fuck on here. Asshole balls. Bitch. Woo. Fucksicle. That's a good one. Oh my goodness. Twat waffle. Haven't heard that one in a long time or ever. Dumbass. Great. Oh, more of the F word. It's classic. That's probably one of my favorites too. So thank you for giving me some of those good examples here. I always like to say I just didn't want to be the first one to curse today. So thank you all for putting those in the chat, even though technically I'm the one that read them, but you get the idea. Dumbass. Yep. We got some good ones. So thank you all for sharing those. So I've already been throwing around some terms here about, profanity and taboos. But I do want to give some kind of defining terms to the concepts of swearing and just bad words in general. When we look at the linguistic research into taboo language, there's really some more specific things. So they do really separate these concepts you're going to hear me use a lot of these words interchangeably for our purposes, but just to kind of break things down, though, as we're thinking about it, taboos are really going to be our concepts or our topics that are going to be considered socially unacceptable by a particular group of people, a community, or a specific culture. I'm mostly using taboo as a more umbrella term, but keep in mind that taboos aren't always going to be swear words. And it's really going to depend on the context of the conversation that you're having, to define really what is a taboo. But for most of our purposes today, anything that's considered taboo is really going to be like our profanity type topics or even our sexuality based topics. When I'm talking about taboos and things, a lot of this is going to be based in mainstream American culture. In different, cultures, different countries, we think of things, some of the things that we might think of as taboo are not taboo to other people, or they're easier to talk about and more, part of everyday conversation. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind as well. For our purposes, we're really going to be looking at swearing and cursing, kind of referring to those good old traditional, curse words, things that are beeped out on TV. A lot of the examples you put in the chat, like our good old four-letter words. So we're going to consider those. So anything that's a swear or a curse is usually considered a taboo, and they've kind of been designated by a particular group of listeners as an example of profanity. Expletives are going to be your more like exclamations or your interjections. So, they can be a swear word, they might not be. So, like when you go, oh, like when you stub your foot or something, that's an expletive, but it might not be a curse word. But if I say damn it, then yeah, that's a curse word, but it's also an expletive when used in that context. And then slang is our more informal language that's used by a particular group of people. So sometimes these are words, sometimes these are going to be phrases, and they can be considered taboo and include aspects of profanity, but other times they might not. So, for example, like this is probably super outdated now, but using the word saying goat for greatest of all time is slang, but that's not really taboo to say. That's not profane in any way as well. But then you have some other slangs that might be, depending on who you're talking to, a little bit more taboo to use or talk about. But the big takeaway here is that there's a lot of really overlapping features of these words, these concepts, and you're probably going to hear me use them interchangeably as we're talking. So before we are going to look at some of the AAC specifics, I do like to establish really a rationale for the why, that this is something that should really even be addressed. So the something by, talking about sexuality in our AAC devices, having access to profanity. I really like to think that this research can be used as evidence to really validate why access to vocabulary to talk about taboo concepts can be both a valuable teaching and learning tool, and how it's really just important for overall communication and autonomy for AAC users. So think of this, if anyone ever questions why you might want to program certain words or assist with programming certain words on a vocabulary, this research can kind of, be in your back pocket to pull out if you need to justify it. So like I said, lots of disclaimers in this presentation, but I really do think it's good to be kind of upfront with the information that you have so that then you have a better idea of where it's coming from and how to apply it. And then also then you can kind of expect what's next or down the road while we're talking about this. So first off, the research as like a holistic idea in the areas of profanity is really limited. And what little research really is available is basically based on mainstream American English. But it's important to keep in mind that there's really going to be big discrepancies, like I mentioned, across communities on what's considered taboo or an example of profanity. And as we move forward through this information, it's really necessary to also mention that the use of taboo language and whether a person chooses to use it or not is a personal choice. So again, that idea of word choice is a personal choice. So when we kind of look at taboos and things like that, sometimes certain words and concepts are going to be taboo in some situations, but then acceptable in others. So, for example, it's usually going to be considered, taboo, inappropriate to be talking about your sex life with your neighbor or your coworkers and, using words like penis and vagina, vulva, they're going to be, that's a little, you might be thrown off if you're hearing your neighbor say that to you just randomly. But if you're using those words in a medical situation or with a doctor, that's not going to be considered a taboo at all. That's going to be a more appropriate setting to use that type of language. Taboos and swearing, profanity, they're also going to have different levels of offensiveness too. And that's going to really depend on the context and then the relationship between the speaker and the listener. And another, good kind of or fun fact about swear words and things like that is that they don't necessarily exist in all languages. So some languages don't have what we think of as English speakers as a classic four-letter curse word, like the F word, and all the other four-letter words. Might not exist in other languages, or the equivalent isn't actually a curse in the same way, or it might not have the same meaning. Depending on the language and the cultural context of the speaker and the listener. So, swearing and talking about taboos and using profanity is a skill, and it's really a part of basic human communication. We all have the right to express ourselves and the right to make choices about the words we use. And the ability to say what we want to say without someone else deciding for us. Again, it's communication, it's a human right. And AAC users should also have that right. All of us, we do learn profanity, whether we're explicitly taught these explicit words or not. We're going to observe and be a listener, and be exposed to examples of profanity and taboos throughout our life. So learning how to use those words is a part of our sociocultural development. It's a part of our language and cognitive development as well. And it's, in a way, it's a life skill. Knowing when to swear, when not to swear, is something that we can learn. And of course, we're going to learn in the hard way in a lot of, situations. Another interesting fact, too, is that our speech does, according to this one study in 2003, it does consist of about 0.5% of swear words in just typical conversation. Now, this study, if I remember correctly, it did look at college speakers and their conversations across a certain period of time. But if you look at the 0.5%, it doesn't sound like a lot, but 0.5% was swear words, and then 1%. So these were pretty close numerically to each other. That 1% was first person plural pronouns. And when we kind of think about it in application to AAC, we're going to think of words like we and us and our as good examples of core vocabulary where we wouldn't typically question that somebody should have access to these words. But when you're looking at it from a numerical and data perspective, the swear words were actually kind of pretty close to that in terms of what makes up conversation. So I'm not saying that, every swear word in the world is going to be as important as maybe some of that more traditional core vocabulary, but it's kind of that number is kind of creeping up there. It is a part of our speech. And the average speaker says about 80 to 90 taboo words per day. Some of us, like myself, probably a lot more. So just kind of keep in mind that taboos and swear words are really a typical part of communication. So the development of profanity, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, as adults, kids are going to learn about taboos, and they're often going to know a lot more than we give them credit for. When looking at how swearing develops, it usually starts around age 2. And a lot of the time, this is usually in younger children, it's repeating adult swears that they might not have the intentionality behind using the swear, but they're learning if they're repeating it from a parent or another adult or an older child, they're reacting to the reaction that the listener has and learning that this is, taboo, that there's something, oh, I'm getting in trouble, or people are laughing when I say this, but they're not learning that full meaning of that word until they're a little older. But words like poopy, butt, fart, those types of words for younger children are going to have intentional meaning and are going to kind of be more of that equivalent of a swear word. When we look at our higher level, like 4-letter words, things like that, those are going to be more like repeated until they start to learn that context later down the road. And a lot of times then too, children are going to kind of start to have a more flexible working vocabulary of bad words by the time they enter school. So children, even though they're not using these words, they know that they exist in a lot of cases, and they have a pretty extensive repertoire of bad words, whether they're actual curse or swear words. They have a lot of them. And then usually by 11 to 12, your middle schoolers, their swearing is going to be adult-like in the functionality of it. One thing too to mention as well is that the idea of bad words kind of changes throughout the lifespan. So words that might have been bad to a young child might then lose their rating of being bad or badness as they get older, and vice versa too. So for one example, in a rating study that was done on how people rate certain types of words as either good words or bad words or like neutral words, those types of things, when they gave the word ball, BALL, to younger children, they didn't view that as a negative word or an inappropriate word. But then as they started to get a little older, you're looking at, that more late elementary, middle school age children, adults, they were rating ball as a more negative word. And that's because they're adding then that slang connotation to refer to reproductive health, body parts. So they're adding that extra layer now onto this word. So there was an interesting study that talks about, rating words and things like that. So all kinds of interesting things to keep in mind too. So this is the progression kind of profanity from a study done by J&J. So the study was in 2013. So it could be a little outdated at this point. But a lot of these words on here we might consider as some of our good old classic 4-letter words. But you'll see that like with our really young kids, you are seeing some of those more heavy curse words on here, but you're also seeing things like stupid, hate you, fart is on there as an example of profanity. And then as the children get older, you're seeing more kind of what we think of as those traditional swears or examples of profane language. So this again was that example where I didn't put the 9 to 10-year-olds on the chart. It doesn't affect the all children data at all. They're a handful of words did not make the all children list. But it's interesting to see that they are the age group that was starting to use more of those identity slur type words. You're also 9 to 10-year-olds are probably typically starting to explore kind of more instances of bullying and targeted language use as well, before they're kind of learning some of those more consequences that come with using those types of language. So if you're interested in that full data set, the article is cited here down below. And then here is just a comparison of that all children number compared to the adult list as well. So it is really interesting to see that a lot of these words are kind of very similar. Curse words for children are also a lot of times the same curse words or examples of profanity that adults might use. So I like to think that this chart can be, a good example of starting to think about what kinds of swear words that somebody might want to have access to in an AAC system, and when maybe we want to start, introducing these or thinking about these types of words. And of course, when I say that, this is, a generalization. Everything is going to look completely different for every individual user. Especially if we're also looking at grid size and the available real estate that's on a person's physical AAC device and their device screen. That's going to dictate maybe what the words we are prioritized are going to be. So we're probably not in a lot of cases immediately jumping and adding the word, fucking bitch to a younger child's device just because they're on this list. But especially again, if we only have a certain amount of real estate on the screen, um, but maybe we want to think about some of those other words that, might be a little more motivating, that are a little still taboo. Like I don't know any children that don't really enjoy laughing and joking about poop. I mean, most adults also like laughing and joking about that as well. So you kind of think about this in a more like creative sense and on an individual basis too. So there's a lot of things to kind of factor in when we're kind of talking about profanity and the types of words that we use. So this is just to kind of give you a starting point, give you some ideas. Another thing too is slang. So slang is something that often we hear AAC users not have access to. And part of that is because a lot of times an AAC user might need someone else to program their device for them, and that person might not know what the cool slang is, or the slang that they're recommending for somebody is completely outdated. So I'm sure I don't know what the coolest slang anymore is. And if I was programming someone's device, I might be giving them the, last week's words. But just to mention too, that slang's really going to be referring to those words and phrases and even sometimes certain grammatical structures that are specific to a particular group. And what makes slang special is that it really adds like a shared understanding of that slang that can be really used to include or exclude people. So I like to joke that it's what the cool kids are saying, but in a way it is, especially for students in school, that being able to use different slang words or the words that their peers are using and have access to kind of those phrases or those memes, things like that, is going to allow them to kind of more participate with their peers in a different way, or even in a more equal way, to be included in those conversations, in those jokes that their peers are also doing. And slang can often be really trendy. It can be short-lived. It can be, included longer. But this is an area that's really going to change heavily. And it's something to just kind of keep track of. I also do want to mention that a lot of slang does come from speakers of non-mainstream American English. And it comes from a lot of different diverse communities, as well as the LGBTQIA plus community. You'll hear a lot of slang come from that and then be adopted more in mainstream standardized English. Another thing too is a lot of the slang is you're also starting to see it more as like internet memes, and then words derived from video clips, sound bites, things like that, and then being adopted into spoken slang as well. So really even using things like memes and emojis or like those short little video clips, those can be really good ways to also kind of include and represent some of these words on somebody's device. So this is just some things to get you thinking about other ways to use language in AAC. So now we're going to kind of continue that talk and look at some more specific application to our AAC practice. So why is this important for AAC? Who cares about bad words? We don't need those. They should be an afterthought. There's so many other things that we should be doing and talking about first. And yeah, in a lot of cases, there are. But in some cases, this can be a really valuable tool to get somebody motivated or interested in using their device. And I like to think that we kind of already talked about a few other reasons why there should be some buy-in into, these types of topics, access to this vocabulary. But here's some more for you if you need a list of why we should consider this important. And a lot of it really comes down to limited access and then not being able to say everything that you want. So if we kind of shift the mindset around taboos, swearing, profanity, things like that, and consider it more of a part of human development and human language use, we can kind of minimize that stigma, which then helps it to be more accessible to a wider group of individuals, including AAC users. And what happens too is that you're really seeing that AAC users often have limited or no access to the vocabulary that's needed to talk about these particular topics. There was one study that interviewed a group of adults who use AAC devices. And there was one woman who wanted to be able to talk about different intimacy acts with her boyfriend. She wanted to consent to certain things, but she was using a symbol-based AAC system. And so she didn't have the access to vocabulary to be able to talk about and convey what types of sex acts and intimacy she wanted to participate in with her partner. And she also didn't have the literacy skills to convey that information either. So at the time, she didn't, in a way, have any option to request that those words be added. She didn't have a way to convey that information easily. And so then the ability to be able to consent and talk about an important part of her adult life was basically taken from her. She didn't have that ability to, consent. And just think about that for a second. An adult in a consenting relationship didn't have a way to convey that to her partner in a safe manner. So then kind of go a step further and think about that if it's not a consenting relationship or it's not with a safe, trusted, intimate partner, a person then might not have the words that they need to report an instance of abuse to them. And in a way, we're preventing somebody from being able to have access to those words to keep themselves safe. And in some cases, to even be able to identify and differentiate different types of abuse as well. So those are kind of all things to think about. And this is kind of where that idea of identity slurs might come into play. I've seen a lot of discourse around that on social media in some of the AAC threads, like how do people handle these types of things? I don't have a magic answer for those. Again, this is all based on personal choice, personal comfort as well. But another rationale to maybe consider why somebody might need access to those words is for them to be able to report that those words were used against them, especially in a, if they are in a, in a group home or a different type of setting where they might experience verbal abuse that's based on their identity. So of course there's the idea of, oh, well, they don't know, they haven't heard this, or they haven't learned it. There's always going to be consequences to using certain words and language in certain situations. But I think, again, it's a larger conversation, but it is important for individuals to be able to relay information that was used against them as well, so then they can continue to live safe lives and advocate for themselves. So these are kind of larger discussions to have with individuals, with family members, so that you're making the best choices for that person. And a couple other things to think about with AAC word choice. It's really going to be also dependent on whether it's really accessible for that person on their system. And if it's not there, then how are they going to get that access to it? And a lot of times, access to certain words is dependent on if the individual can program their own device and if they have the literacy skills to do that. And not everybody does. And so then in those situations, what does that person do? They either have to wait until there is an instance where people are then questioning what happened or thinking we need to be able to talk about this after the fact. So sometimes it's good to kind of maybe think about it and have these really hard conversations before a really dangerous or unfortunate situation does happen. Other times too, that sometimes people in a lot of cases are victimized, and you're almost creating, a perfect victim by somebody who then can't report the abuse that has happened to them. So I know that that's really dark and it's not the most fun thing to think about, but it is a reality that a lot of individuals with disabilities experience, and especially AAC users for it. So this slide also does have some more information that looks into numbers and some of the research that's kind of reported on how vocabulary is limited for AAC users, as well as statistics on AAC users and people with disabilities as being victims and survivors of abusive situations. So these numbers are a little dated. You'll see the one article that's saying that people with severe speech disabilities are 2 to 6 times more likely to experience abuse, even though the stat is from 1994. The newer numbers, or they're hard to find, some of those numbers, but the numbers are still not great. So this is something that's still an issue in the disability community. And we, as AAC users, supporters, and individuals who do that. I do want to highlight a comment that somebody did put, that as an AAC user, I don't like seeing slurs in my device. They cause an adrenaline reaction. When I need to say those words, I spell them out, and reporting on their experience. Thank you so much for sharing that. That is definitely a valid point as well. And I think it highlights that it is, a personal choice, and everyone does have the right to make those personal calls and talk about those things in a way that keeps them safe as well, too. So then I also wanted to share some important or some barriers that were reported and observed. So these are things that I've seen personally in my practice, as well as things that have been reported by adult AAC users who have participated in some of our programs at the Institute on Disabilities here at Temple. So first off, there is a lot of limitations in access to certain vocabulary in the available systems that are on the market. I will say, though, in the last couple years, things have been getting a lot better with the vocabulary that is pre-stored or kind of pre-programmed on some of these devices, kind of when you first download apps or you first get an insurance-funded device purchased. You are starting to see a lot more access to more robust body part vocabulary, vocabulary to talk about intimacy and relationships. So that is a big win, but I think we still have more work to do, making things a little easier to have access as well. There's always opportunities in the, with the manufacturers to continue. Other things that we're really talking about too is basically like the idea of censorship with the language that's on it. And it really could be for a variety of reasons. It could be personal bias, that, a person chooses that they don't want to have access to these words on their device, which is absolutely a valid reason. If you are not comfortable and don't want certain language on your AAC device, you have the right to make that call and then, and make that decision for your life. It's your voice. But we want to think that people shouldn't have the opportunity to have access just because they are using an AAC device. So we might see limited language and access due to, the idea that like we see ableism, we see infantilization of people with disabilities that's preventing them from language that you might see other people of their age using who do not use AAC devices. So lots of things can kind of really censor what somebody has. Another thing too is that we might replace terms with those more appropriate alternatives. So if we're talking about vocabulary to talk about genitals, you're going to see things like PP or private parts. And while those might be appropriate for younger children to be able to talk about, you're also still censoring access to that knowledge. And that same word might not cut it when you're talking in a more medical situation, or it could be easily misconveyed, misunderstood. And, the words that were fun for you to use, or those curses like like stupid and poopy head, something like that isn't going to have the same effect as it's going to have, when you're an adult and you need another, insult to give somebody. If you're in an argument with somebody and they're dishing it out and you're making that call that you want to dish it out too, poopy head's not going to go very far in a disagreement. So those are kind of things too. People are going to age, their vocabulary is going to want to change. People also, make different choices later in life about the things they want to talk about. So we want to make sure that language is keeping up with the person. And again, this is kind of that idea a lot of times too. I never want to blame families or caregivers, but a lot of times, especially if somebody isn't programming their device independently, it usually is more, it's an afterthought until something happens, or but we want to try to get ahead of that first so that we're giving people access to these words. Another thing too that unfortunately we do see as well, especially with access to body part vocabulary, if there is a instance of abuse where somebody does need to report something that happened to them, and they don't have access to these types of words until after the fact, that might prevent the individual from being able to get justice. There's a lot that kind of goes on in the court system, and if you didn't have body part vocabulary before, and now all of a sudden you are, and you're reporting, that someone touched you inappropriately or did it something, that could be questioned. And that can then, make that situation a lot harder for that survivor. And then their story is being more questioned in the court of law. So those are kind of other things to consider too about, we're seeing these barriers and stuff with access to certain types of vocabulary. So this slide here is, again, I always think having more information than you need is helpful. So this is just some ways to kind of think about these types of words and concepts and how they can contribute to communicative competence, especially for practitioners in this field, who might be getting questioned by admin for why are we talking about, X, Y, and Z at our facility or at our rehab center or at school. So this could be a rationale, to kind of help kind of move this conversation along and steer this mindset in a more open direction. So I do want to showcase some, examples of vocabulary selection. So again, here are kind of breaking down some of these words just to give a ballpark idea of maybe when we want to visit and consider having access to some of these types of words. Again, there's no magic one size fits all. I can't stress that word choice is personal choice, and how a person wants to interact and access with that is, they're right, they get to choose, but these are kind of things to start that conversation to, get those gears turning and how we think about it. And so some of these words are going to be more appropriate with younger children, but then you're going to also then want to change those words as somebody's getting older. And the words that a high schooler or an adult are going to use are going to look a lot different in many cases for different types of communicative functions than they would for a very young child or an elementary school child. But again, there's always going to be other factors such as grid size, such as literacy skills, that a person has when how we're also representing this type of vocabulary and accessing this type of vocabulary on a device, whether it's from symbols or whether it's through learning to spell these types of words. So there's lots of different things to consider, but again, just a little game plan here. There's no one size fits all. Same thing here as well, but for more specific sexual health vocabulary and words related to relationships. That's going to look a lot different across the lifespan. But kind of think about words like for body parts, words for different acts, words for bodily fluids and functions. Those are all normal parts of the human experience. They change throughout our lifetime. Some stay the same, some don't. But we want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the person as well as things that are age appropriate for them to be able to talk about. And sometimes things too that like get forgotten are things like vocabulary to talk about like puberty and personal hygiene, personal care. A lot of times bathroom vocabulary is considered taboo. talking about, all those different things that happen as your body changes can be a little awkward and uncomfortable, but we still want to be able to give, children and individuals that opportunity to be able to express those concerns and also have access to learning about those concerns too. Other things to keep in mind that it doesn't just have to be vocabulary that we think of as like a swear word or a taboo word. Even words like stop and no and hug and touch and hate, those can be words that some people don't automatically think of, but they might not use. Like I worked with one family and the mom was saying, oh, we don't use the word hate in our family. I deleted it from his device. And then she kind of then came back later and said, oh, should I have actually done that? I don't think I should. And the idea is, well, if your son was able to use the word, um, then you can have that conversation that you were going to have with his twin brother for saying that. A lot of teenagers like to push boundaries and say, that they hate this, they hate that. And it's okay to have that rule in your home that we don't use that word in certain contexts. But does that mean that we remove that word from somebody's vocabulary because we can, we can just hit delete and take it out? Again, I always fall back on the what if somebody said that to him? Then he has no way of telling you as his mom that somebody was bullying or, using this language to him. So there's multi, faceted issues with this, but it's if you're a provider or a supporter, these are good conversations to have so families and users can make those informed decisions about different words. And it doesn't just, again, it's even the word stop or no. A lot of times we hear, oh, we don't use the word no in our house, but we also want to make sure that somebody has the ability to say no because consent is going to be a big part of their life down the road. They're going to need to be able to say no to certain things. So the next couple slides are just going to feature some examples, kind of breaking down words related to sexual health and healthy relationships, just to kind of give you some more examples of different types of vocabulary, kind of concepts and topics to think about so that, you're thinking about how can we talk about these ideas with the AAC that we have, or are these things that we need to add? And there's also some different examples on the screen as well of some of the layouts that relate to these concepts here. So some things to think about, we want to think about anatomy and physiology. And I did forget to give another content warning. So another content warning, there will be some pictures featuring body parts on this slide, as well as some of the ones later in the presentation too. So we want to think about different symbols to represent different types of body parts and also how detailed this is going to get. Some systems as a default are going to have more like kind of fine-tuned vocabulary for the reproductive system and genitalia than other systems. In some AAC systems, you kind of have to go in and do that yourself and fine-tune that vocabulary with how specific you want it to be. So those are things to think about as well. We also want to think about puberty and adolescent development. Some systems, again, they're going to have words related to menstruation pre-programmed. Other systems do not. So those are things that might need to be added and put it in as well. So we also maybe want to have, body words related to body changes, emotional development, all of those things that a young person might be experiencing so that they can be able to talk about that, but they can also then somebody, especially if somebody is modeling with person on their AAC or on a similar device, that then they're able to also have it in a way that's receptive. They're seeing their language and their AAC being used with them to talk about these concepts as well, instead of it just happening to a person. You can also, include things for hygiene routines so that there's images to go along with some of these maybe new hygiene routines so that a person can kind of see those pictures, like think about it as a visual schedule as well, not just talk about it, but also understand what's happening rather than it happening to you and it's being talked about after the fact. Other really important things as well to include are gender identity and expression, especially in terms of being able to advocate for yourself, safety, and your equity. These we're starting to see some default devices are having some more inclusive language in their devices. Again, this is just a screenshot here, but most AAC systems can be very customized. So people can import their, all kinds of different vocabulary that they want to be able to talk about themselves, people that they love and know, and all types of identities can be represented on AAC. Same thing for sexual orientation and identity. Again, we're starting to see some more inclusive language being used and more inclusive images kind of being built into systems. We, of course, have long ways to go. And people can kind of, I love to see, in some of the more open sourced AAC things where AAC users are sharing their boards to talk about their identities and communities. So those are some really also great places to find maybe more updated and current examples for gender identity and sexual orientation. Other options too would be having things to talk about sexual health. So not just about body parts, but maybe about different infections, diseases, things that can go wrong with your body as well. You want to be able to talk about those things to your doctor, to a caregiver, so that you can get better, you can feel better. Other things too about pregnancy prevention, about safe sex, contraception, all of those things that you want to be able to include so that somebody can live their best life and feel safe in their daily interactions, in their medical care. So these are all kinds of things to consider. Again, every person's going to have different needs. They're going to have different boundaries. They're going to have, certain things that are more important to them to be able to talk about and to prioritize. Again, these are conversations to have. This is no magic, go and put all of these words on somebody's device, but it's more have that conversation with the person you're supporting or the person you know. And sometimes too, it's even good to just kind of bring it up like, hey, have you ever thought about putting X, Y, and Z on your device? Because sometimes even, a user might not have thought of these things until after the fact. And they're like, oh, that's a great idea. I should have this on here. So these are all good conversations to just have and think about. And of course, vocabulary to talk about interpersonal violence, reporting abuse, but also things like the like words and concepts to talk about like the prevention and intervention, especially if somebody is getting support, they're asking for help in certain areas. These can be things to also kind of consider, or the different resources and local services that are in their area to help that maybe they've been involved in or that they are considering to reach out to. These are other things to kind of throw in there. I know we're getting to the end of the time. I'm a talker. This is a lot of information that I've kind of jam-packed into a 1 hour thing. So I'm going to try to go through. I do see some really great comments and questions. So we will stay a little bit past 1 o'clock, but I do understand if, you're using this as a lunch and learn on your lunch hour if you have to go. We are recording the session as long as everything goes like it's supposed to with the magic tech gods and the computer recording. We will hopefully have this session as well as other sessions recorded and posted on our website. So if you do need to log off, please feel free. The slides are also in the chat as well. So feel free to download those. And if you're not seeing them in the chat, you can shoot us an email. Someone will put my email in the chat for me, and then you can shoot me an email and I can make sure that you get a copy of the slides, especially if you had to log off early. So the next couple slides are just going to be giving some tips and tricks for some implementation strategies here, as well as some references then. So if you have to go, you're not missing too much. So it's just, again, I've said it probably 100 times, but I'll say it again because I think it's a good thing to remember is that word choice is personal choice. So when we are thinking about supporting somebody in starting this kind of conversation with users, with teams, with families, about, adding these types of topics to an AAC device, we want to consider the person's age. We want to talk about the environments and think about the environments that they're in. And also, of course, centering the preferences of the AAC user as an individual. So thinking about their individual identity, their lifestyle, the communities they participate in, their day to day. So we want to make sure that we're, again, valuing and centering what they want to be able to talk about. And then there's also going to be, things like family and cultural considerations that are going to influence some of the decisions on when families might be comfortable supporting access to these conversations. Sometimes the conversation it isn't easy to have or to introduce. And sometimes it doesn't feel like it's your place, especially if you're a teacher or you're a therapist. But this is information that can be valuable to give. At least let users and teams and families kind of think about it and have that information to make the choices that they feel the most comfortable with. And of course, not every strategy is going to work for all individuals, and not every person is going to even want to entertain the idea, and that's okay. And of course, we also want to reiterate that certain words are going to be very harmful. They're very triggering, and they shouldn't be used except for in situations such as, reporting instances of violence, abuse, or bullying that has happened to a person. You have the ability to say the things you want to say, but you're not necessarily free from the consequences of those things that you want to say. I've been one question that someone asked at another presentation that I did was that they worked with adults with traumatic brain injury, and sometimes the things that an individual wanted to say to maybe flirt with ladies was not the most appropriate things in the world to say to ladies. So was it the therapist's job in that situation to program those things, knowing that they were going to be perceived as offensive? And I don't have a magic answer for that one. I think that's a very loaded question. Of course, as a clinician or someone supporting an AAC user, you of course have the right to be safe yourself and, not experience those types of words, especially if they're going to be triggering for you. But the idea of censoring somebody just because we can on an AAC device is also something to think about. Because if another person is able to say those things with oral speech, are they going to say that, or are they going to ask their, a speech therapist or the family member, oh, do you think this is, okay to say? They might not, and somebody might not be having those conversations. I think, I didn't have a magic answer then, and I still don't now, but those are kind of some dilemmas that you might see as somebody supporting or trying to advocate for these types of conversations or this type of vocabulary. I think, in that kind of situation, it's like, well, it wasn't the worst thing in the world, you could say. It's also probably not going to work out the way you want it to, and talk about, those consequences. I think that having the discussion is always valuable, but at the end of the day, the person's going to have to learn the hard way that you probably aren't going to have a good time trying to pick up ladies with using those words. So, though, again, I don't have magic answers, but those are kind of things to think about. So some teaching of swears and profanity etiquette. Again, that idea of there's going to be some consequences. There is an etiquette, there's an art using certain words. So it's going to be okay to curse in certain situations. It's going to be okay to talk about certain topics or use certain words in this context, but it's absolutely not okay to use it in these. And so learning that kind of nuance, that can be a really hard skill to learn, but it can also be a really valuable skill for somebody. And mistakes are going to happen. And we learn from them. And sometimes that learning is really hard, but that's all about, having the right to be able to communicate and express ourselves. And sometimes those mistakes are going to be funny, and sometimes they're not going to be funny, but that's all about, the human experience, and learning and using language. So, and just things to think about. No magic answers here. And these are just kind of some questions that I've seen or that people ask. And so if you're, how do I respond when someone tells me off using their device? Well, how would you respond if somebody just came up to you and started yelling at you? What are you going to do? What if my child curses out in public, or they say this at, in the middle of class. Okay. Well, what happens if their brother who, uses oral speech said that? Are they going to get in trouble too? I had one mom say that once that her teenage son, I think, said damn or something on his device, and they sent him to the principal's office, and that was a great victory, because they were like, wow, he got in trouble. He thought it was hilarious that he had to go to the principal's office for saying, a bad word. But that was a natural consequence of using that word in the middle of the classroom. Um, and did he think it was funny? Yep, but so do a lot of other kids too. They think that's funny to curse in the classroom and get in trouble, and some care, some don't. But who's to say just because you're an AAC user means that you don't have that opportunity? Of course, if somebody's learning, like, we're gonna make mistakes, kids are gonna push boundaries. They think it's funny. But, if you keep doing it, sometimes there's gonna be a consequence. And so kind of coming up with a plan, or being able to redirect, or having that conversation of it, if you're, saying the word poop at the dinner table, well, dinner's not the good time to talk about it. And now, as a parent, you're going to have to address that. And that's okay. So it's kind of good to have some plans in place for when the inevitable happens. But we don't want to take somebody's device away as punishment for cursing or using that language, because then you're taking away their voice. And we don't want to do that. Other strategies too, potty talk. Most, again, I mentioned this earlier, most little kids, most adults are going to enjoy bathroom humor. So these can be great ways to kind of introduce some of these more, interesting topics. But there are also great opportunities to, model different routines and things. You go to the bathroom multiple times a day, or, this is a part of human life. So these are great ways to kind of model, to expand on that language. And then as, children get older or they're adults, maybe instead of, using the word like poop and fart, then you're using other words like shit to kind of talk about those types of activities. So that can be a great way to kind of sneak some of these in. Other things too would be the strategy of learning what's private versus public. So we don't want to confuse private with secret. We don't, especially when it's related to words for sexual anatomy and health, we don't want there to be shame with certain words, but sometimes there are conversations that we don't have at the grocery store that maybe we wait to have at home when we're with a trusted person. And maybe we want to have or identify some of those trusted and familiar communication partners that we can kind of have and practice some of those more private conversations with, especially if this is the first time somebody's learning how to use these types of words and having access to these words. Again, this is a strategy for some people, not for everybody, but these are kind of things to consider. I probably personally need to practice private versus public myself a little bit, because I tend to overshare. Other things too, intimacy and consent. So we don't just have to talk about sexual health and anatomy in a sexual and intimate context. We can talk about these concepts during daily hygiene routines. Those can be a great way to kind of introduce this type of vocabulary for individuals, especially individuals with complex bodies who sometimes may not have a choice of certain hygiene routines and what's happening, but being able to, communicate, talk about these words during that can also then, be empowering, and also helping them learn and access this vocabulary in a familiar context where it's safe, so that then well, not hopefully, in the event that they never have to use this vocabulary in a negative context, but then that they are able to use it in the event that something does happen. We also want to model consent in everyday situations. So things like hugs, high fives, can I talk to you? Things like that can be great ways to also introduce some of these contexts too. And then for teens and adults, we want to be able to support them in having vocabulary for intimacy and the relationships that they want to have and participate in, of course, safely as well on their device. And then Can't say enough, stressing the importance of being able to report instances of abuse or unsafe situations. So other tips and tricks, just like we say, we model core vocabulary and other types of language, we can model how to use profanity, swear words. You know, if we drop something, we can swear, we can show where that is on the device. We can, call somebody a name. If it's, I see somebody doing something strange or whatever they shouldn't be doing out in public, or they're being rude to me, I could say later to my friend, oh, they're being an asshole, or they were an asshole, or that person was a jerk. You can use these types of words and start to introduce them in kind of conversations that you're probably already having, or the things that you're already saying. And we want to model both positive examples of profanity and also negative examples of profanity. So like the F word doesn't have to just be used in a negative context. It can also, we can use like abso-fucking-lutely or like fuck yeah, things like that. There are positive ways to also use these words, and that can be really motivating for somebody and exciting for them too. These topics aren't just bad topics or bad words. We can use them in more fun, exciting conversations, positive conversations. Other ways too to kind of sneak these in, quoting movies, TV, songs, things like that. There's a lot of, taboos and slang and swear words in a lot of media. So those can be great ways. And of course, using peers and siblings and the internet can be really great tools for, finding examples of current slang or current things that somebody might want to talk about that might include some of these topics, and can also be great ways to then kind of further teach and support someone in learning how to use these types of words. Other things to kind of consider for adults with communication disorders, especially adults who have acquired communication disorders, such as a traumatic brain injury or post-stroke. Sex and intimacy. Now, of course, this isn't just for people with acquired disability. Anybody can have sex and intimacy. And, that can be a very important part for a lot of folks. It's an activity of daily living, and communication does play a key role in that. But physical intimacy might look different or be challenging for somebody, especially after they've experienced a medical event, such as a stroke or a brain injury. So there might be changes in their mobility status. They might have changes in their ability to communicate within that moment or how they communicate in general as well. So their sex life might have changed. And so those are kind of things to consider, especially if you're a family member, caregiver, or, clinician supporting somebody. So these are kind of things to consider, that you want to maybe talk to the person and their partner about different communication strategies. You might want to help them identify vocabulary and phrases that maybe if they are using a device to program, or phrases maybe that doesn't just have to be on a high-tech device. It could be on a light or a low-tech system as well. And then, of course, there's a difference between spicy bedroom talk and the medical terminology, using those more official penis and vulva and vagina and breasts aren't the most sexy words when you're trying to have intimacy with your partner. So that might be where some of that slang and those more fun words might come into play for the bedroom for some adults. And availability and access, again, I know I'm way over time. There's a lot to talk about. So again, if you have to peace out, I totally understand. But if you're going to hang on for a couple more minutes, the next couple of slides are going to have some more explicit language and some symbols of reproductive anatomy. So I just want to talk about a few of the things that are available on the market. So one thing to mention too is Acapella Voices does have this feature called Vocal Smileys. So this is going to include more of those kind of like expletives or more like prosody and variation in the recordings of the synthesized speech. So it has some certain sounds and exclamations. One thing to mention though with this is if you're looking for certain words, they're going to appear in the different dialects of English, not just in the American English accents. So if you're looking for some more profanity or spicier language examples, That's where maybe like the British English might come into play. So look through all of the different smileys that are available to kind of find something that's closer to what you're looking for there. So just again, some examples of how vocabulary can be represented. Here's an example of touch chat. We have TD Snap with some examples of vocabulary for sexuality. TD Snap with particular edits for swearing. So these are kind of some of the examples that pop up when you start to type in some of these words. Proliquo to go with additional edits in the body parts page to include vagina, penis, and breast. Now Proliquo, not the to-go version, but just the Proliquo version, also has some representation for some additional vocabulary. You'll see on this one that there is private parts written here. Same thing, but with the UK English dialect variations for certain words. And then this one has some customization edits as well. Voco chat, swearing examples that are just pre-stored, but look at all that real estate to add some more good swear words in there. And then you have Voco chat for the body parts for reproductive anatomy. The Grid app does also have a feature to include kind of the filters for more explicit imagery. You'll see that some of it was kind of blurred out, but then in other variations it was not. So that option is to turn on, but it's still use your discretion. Super core, just some examples of some of the swear words, but again, look at all that real estate to be creative and fill in the blanks. More examples of the body part vocabulary on Grid within the super core vocabulary set. And then this is just the default kind of pre-programmed of Lingraphica as well. And then all my references. Oops, I accidentally clicked on a thing and it popped up, but there are more references on here, but then I like to say you should need, but there's some really good places to get started. Some of my references in here are all lead to articles and information by self-advocates and AAC users who have talked about these topics as well. So I highly recommend, if this is an area of interest, to check those out and read some of those works to kind of dive further into this conversation, especially from the perspectives of AAC users. And so here's just our contact information, Institute on Disabilities, our upcoming webinars. So you'll see we switch between Wednesdays and Tuesdays at noon Eastern time. And next week, Ming will talk to us about cultural and linguistic considerations for AAC. And so that'll be on Wednesday, October 16th at 12 noon, again, Eastern time. If you haven't registered for that, the link is here. It's also on the Institute on Disabilities website. Feel free to register. We'd love to see you there. And then we'll have some more couple topics as well. Here is our survey for our webinar. We just ask that you complete the survey, let us know how we're doing. It helps our funders know that people like coming to this kind of stuff and that we can keep being able to offer. Also, if you do need a certificate for the training, you can request the certificate there. I will need your name and your email though. It's okay if you still give a bad review, even though you want a certificate. That's totally fine. I won't look at that part. But please complete that if you do need that certificate, so we can make sure that we get that to you. I do them by hand, so please just give me a couple days to get you a certificate. And if you are attending multiple of the webinars in this series, we do also ask that you just complete a survey and certificate request for each one that you do attend each week. And to receive the certificate, you do have to have attended the entire webinar training. I mean, plus or minus a couple minutes, that's fine. But we do check on the Zoom record just to make sure. So I know I went over, but if you're still with us, thank you so much for coming. I did see a couple comments and questions in the in the chat. Um, but there was one I did want to share, that somebody did share that there is a good identity page for Motor Plan in Page Set Central. I believe that's referring to one of the AAC apps. So that sounds like a great resource for folks that want to be able to communicate more about that topic. Oh, and TD Snap. So awesome. So TD Snap sounds like they've got a good one um, with some pre-programmed vocabulary for folks. So I'm just reading through some of the questions. Sometimes parents speak for the young adult and say it's not appropriate, even though the teen is an adult or about to be one. What should you say to that as a provider? That's really hard. Um, Again, it's another one of those, it's an easier said than done. It's easier for me to be here on the platform being like, you should do this than Haley when I have a conversation with an actual family. I get very nervous and it's a hard conversation to have. And sometimes it's not fun to hear the answer. Um, you try your best. I've used some of that research and those rationales to kind of say, well, this is, what they're hearing at school. And I do find that when we come from the perspective of being able to report bullying and things like that, and there does seem to be a little bit of buy-in there. Because of course, no parent wants their child to be bullied or, harassed or anything like that. But that part of the conversation is a little less exciting to the teenager. The teenager wants to be able to say what they want to say. So it's really challenging. I I've also, there is one really good article that was a research study that they did look, it's on my reference sheet. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but they did interview teenage AAC users to see what the words that they like were most important to them. And being able to share that. I think being able to share experiences of similar aged like self-advocates and peers can be really helpful to get some of that parent buy-in. And it's also, is this type of vocabulary, if that individual does have siblings, are there, and their siblings are similar in age, are they using those types of words as well? That can be really hard to have. Um, I'm just scrolling through for some other comments and questions. But I thank everyone for coming. And I'm so happy that, you were here to kind of help facilitate this conversation and kind of continue to, talk about these topics. That's one of the best ways that we're going to be able to continue to advocate as communities and stakeholders and supporters in the AAC world. Oops, and now I'm clicking on all kinds of stuff. So that kind of concludes our webinar series, or not the series, today's webinar. So I think I thank you everyone for coming. And please do, if you feel free to send us an email or if you have any questions or further thoughts, or if you do need a copy of the slides. So again, thank you all for coming, and we are going to end the webinar now. Hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and thank you for spending this time with us. Bye, everyone.